This is the P-61, called the Black Widow. She's well named because she packs 4 caliber 50 machine guns and 4 20mm cannon. An obituary notice goes with each bite. Those twin engines will carry her fast enough to catch up with almost anything in the sky. And she's maneuverable, as a fighter should be. Very easy to handle. She stalls, takes off, and lands at low speeds. Getting checked out on her is a pleasure. The Black Widow flies the skies in 3 sleek models. First, the YP-61, the earliest model of this ebony killer. Then the P-61A, the first model to go into combat service. And finally, the P-61B, the newest combat version. Let's watch this pilot learning his stuff on a P-61A. The first thing to do is familiarize yourself with the cockpit. Learn where all the controls and gauges are located. The TO for the airplane is a big help. Diagrams and photographs make it easy for you to get to know the ship. After a couple of hours of study, you are able to pick out the controls and gauges without the loss of a second. And with your eyes shut. That's important because you can't afford to waste time in this fast twin-engine job. And there's no co-pilot around to help you. You're going up for a ride, just to get the feel of the ship. But first you have to check the airplane, thoroughly. That's your best guarantee for living to a ripe old age. Like most airplanes equipped with tricycle landing gear, the 61 has a nose gear towing pin. Check it, as the nose wheel may shimmy on takeoff and become damaged. Check the nose wheel pin cap. Be sure it's on tight. Then check the rest of the landing gear for inflation of the tire and general condition. The red mark shows whether the tire has slipped on the rim. The strut ought to be extended about 4 inches. And another item not to be forgotten is the pressure in the emergency landing gear system. There's a gauge in each wheel well. It should show 700 pounds per square inch for the nose gear. Repeat the same inspection on the other 2 wheels. No cuts or bruises. Tread's okay. No slippage. Strut clean and extended around 4 inches. And the emergency pressure? 750 pounds per square inch for the main landing gear. Now to give the exterior of the plane a general going over. Skin's all right. No loose rivets or dents. Antenna mounted securely. De-icer boots okay. No rips or places where oil or gasoline has been spilled. Gun bay doors tight. Control surfaces in good shape. All hatches and doors must be closed and locked. Otherwise, they'll blow open and probably off when the plane's in the air. So each one should be checked. The radar operator's top hatch, rear entrance door. Now you can get into the cockpit, but you have to climb right out again through the top hatch. Careful not to step on any plexiglass. There's one thing more to check outside the airplane. The gas tank filler caps. Two on each side, and oil cap. Make sure they're fastened tightly in place. Here's an old story, but a wise one. Form 1A. Check and sign for red diagonals. Turn on the circuit breakers behind the gunner's seat. And make sure the gunner's escape hatch is closed and locked. From now on, you are in command of the airplane. What would you do now? Well, you know the answer to that from studying the tech order. Turn on the generators. Then more circuit breakers. The ones for the starters and fuel booster pumps. and the light circuit breakers. Now look around the cockpit to see if everything is in order. Nothing loose. No tools or papers to foul up the controls. Instruments okay. The controls, and that includes the throttles, are locked. Unlock and try them out. Operate the rudders, elevators. Put ailerons through their complete range. Notice that those ailerons are unusual? They're the spoiler type, especially effective at high speeds. The P-61 is the only airplane in the Army Air Forces that has them. Controls are all okay. See if all the controls and switches are set properly. Open throttles 1/4 to 1/3. Prop control switches in automatic. Feathering switches normal. Test the prop circuit breakers to make sure the buttons are in. Check fuel in all tanks. Fuel valves set to outboard tanks. Crossfeed, which supplies both engines from one tank, off. Air pressure for the emergency brakes ought to be 425 to 450 pounds per square inch. Check the clock against your watch and the altimeter. Oxygen pressure 425 pounds per square inch. Oxygen regulator to auto mix on. Test the trim tabs. If they're in good working order, set them for takeoff. Now the instructor is ready to take over. While the ground crew pulls props through 12 blades, set the superchargers at neutral. And throttles 1/4 to 1/3 open. Adjust both mixture controls to idle cutoff. Props at full increase RPM. Check to see that the props are clear. Then turn on the battery switches. On the P-61A, there are 2 individual battery switches and a master battery switch. The master switch on the ignition unit is for ignition only. Turn booster pumps to low. Carburetor air cold. Oil shutters 1/3 open. Make sure all cowl flaps are open and the intercooler flaps closed. Automatic pilot oil pressure off. Make sure that the VHF switches are off. Check carburetor air filter. Turn on master ignition switch and the right switch to both. Energize the starter and then prime the engine in the last 5 seconds of energizing. Since a putt-putt is furnishing your power, you should energize for no longer than 10 seconds before flipping the switch to mesh. If you are using the battery, the maximum energizing period would be 20 seconds. Don't energize beyond those limits or you'll damage the starter. When the putt-putt is being used, only your main battery switch should be on. Turn on the other switches when the crew chief disconnects the putt-putt. Adjust your mixture control to auto-rich. Close the throttle to run your engine as slowly as possible until oil pressure is indicated. As soon as oil pressure shows, adjust to between 1,000 and 1,200 RPM to prevent fouling of the plugs as a consequence of prolonged idling. Now we're ready to run through the same procedure for the left engine. Throttle to between 600 and 700 RPM until the oil pressure gauges indicate a steady pressure. The cold oil pressure will go up to 150 or 200 pounds until the oil temperature gets to 40 or 50 degrees centigrade. Keep the prop governor in high RPM. Turn the fuel booster pumps off. Your fuel pressure should be between 15 and 17 pounds. When the oil temperature gets to about 40 degrees centigrade, open the oil cooler flaps about 1/3. Keep the engine cowl flaps open. Operate the cowl flaps and intercooler flaps, watching them from the window. Operate the oil cooler flaps and check the gauge. Check both hydraulic pressure gauges. Make your interphone check and see that all entrance hatches are closed and locked. Okay to taxi to runway 29. Use taxi strip directly in front of you.
Runway 29, roger.
Brakes for taxiing as little as possible. This holds good for any two-engined airplane. And when you want to turn, use your outboard engine. Always taxi with your flaps up. Set brakes and proceed to make check. Your oil pressure should be at normal, and cylinder head temperature must be over 100 degrees. Now check one engine at a time. See that the prop is at high RPM, and put mixture control in auto rich. Open your throttle briefly to about 40 inches to clean the engine out. Then, reduce manifold pressure to 30 inches. RPM should be from 1950 to 2100. Check your ammeter. It ought to show charge. Next, turn off one magneto. Your loss of RPM should not exceed 100. Now make a quick check on the other mag. Running an engine at high manifold pressure on one mag may cause serious detonation. Next, test the prop circuit breakers. Pull the prop governor control lever back from its high RPM setting until it drops 200. Advance the prop control to the original setting. Use the feather switch to check the prop. When RPM starts to drop, switch back to normal position. Put the prop selector switch in decrease. As soon as RPM drops 200, move the switch to increase. When the RPM goes back to 2100, put the switch in automatic. Now go through the same procedure for the other engine. And then you're ready for the final check. Fuel booster pumps at high. Fuel pressure between 15 and 19 pounds per square inch. Prop circuit breakers down. Prop switches at automatic. Prop controls at high RPM. Mixture auto rich. Intercooler flaps closed. Upper cowl flaps closed. Lower cowl flaps open about 1/4. Wing flaps 1/3 down. Gyro instruments uncaged. Oil temperature should be between 40 and 90 degrees centigrade. The oil pressure 75 to 90 pounds per square inch at 2,000 RPM. Cylinder heads between 120 to 205 degrees centigrade. Hydraulic and accumulator pressure 800 to 1,100 pounds per square inch. Now you're ready to scramble. Yes, the P-61A takes off like a homesick angel. But flying the P-61B is smoother and even more efficient, with these latest modifications giving her top performance. A rack for night binoculars, a new wrinkle in night fighting, an electrically operated accessory panel, push-button type circuit breakers, 2 improved heating units, trim tab removed from aileron, landing gear with a neutral position. In the down position, a lock prevents the gear from being raised accidentally. Main gear nacelle doors close with wheels down. Taxi lights on the nose wheel. Now let's go upstairs and watch another P-61 go through its paces. A YP in this case. The ship takes off at about 105 miles an hour, indicated without flaps. She'll fly herself off the ground. But now let's see how the P-61 takes off with flaps. Using quarter flaps provides another normal takeoff. Notice that the nose need be raised very little. But if you ever have to take off from a bombed field in a hurry, use 2/3 flaps. Keep nose wheel on ground until you have flying speed, then pull her loose. Climb a few feet and level off to gain speed. The P-61 will take off in a short space if you handle her correctly. Here's another way to clear an obstacle at the end of the runway. Flaps down 2/3 again. But this time, stay on the ground as long as possible, gaining all the speed you can. Then pull up steeply and keep climbing until the obstacle is cleared. 140 miles per hour gives you the best rate of climb, but 160 is generally recommended for normal operation. The higher speed keeps the engine running cooler. For normal cruising, use 2230 RPM or less. Manifold pressure, 29 to 34.5 inches in auto lean. Oil temperature, 60 to 85 degrees centigrade. Oil pressure, 60 to 90 pounds per square inch. Fuel pressure, 15 to 17 pounds per square inch. Cylinder head temperature, about 210 degrees centigrade. Generator voltage, 28 to 28.5. Amps, 200 maximum each when using turret and all radio equipment. Shift the supercharger every 3 hours to prevent accumulation of sludge. The Widow is very easy to get along with. She won't give you any trouble on turns. Climbs like a monkey. Dives well. Here she is doing a chandelle. A stall at about 95 miles per hour with flaps up and power off. The response and effectiveness of elevator and rudders is completely normal. Elevator forces are exceptionally light for a ship of its size due to the spring-loaded tabs. Failure of either engine in flight isn't a problem if you follow the proper procedure. Hit the feathering switch, then close the throttle. Move the mixture control to idle cutoff. Turn the fuel supply of the dead engine off. Snap the ignition switch off after the prop stops rotating. Put the live engine in auto rich. And trim your rudder tab. Close the cowl flaps on the dead engine all the way. And finally, close the oil cooler flaps and intercooler shutter on the dead engine. Even when stalled on one engine, the Black Widow isn't in trouble. On one engine, you can turn in either direction if you maintain safe single-engine airspeed, have your plane trimmed properly, and remember coordination. And don't be timid about racking her around. You can even do vertical banks into the dead engine if you keep her at proper flying speed. To unfeather is equally simple. Turn the ignition switch on with the throttle closed. Set the prop control lever to the decrease RPM position. Turn on the fuel supply. Move the mixture control to auto rich. Set the feathering switch to normal position and hold the selector switch in the increase RPM until your engine speed reaches 800 RPM. Then release the selector switch. When minimum engine operating temperatures have been reached, place selector switches in automatic. And finally, adjust mixture, throttle, and prop levers to the desired power and engine RPM and retrim the ship. In case of both fuel and booster pump failure on one of the engines, turn on cross-feed valve and the booster pump of the operating engine to high. If, in an emergency, you need the absolute maximum performance, use the water injection, which is found on most P-61s. Just shove the throttles all the way open. That turns on the pumps. And then push the water injection switch. That sends the water into the engine. To use the autopilot, turn on the pressure valve. Pressure should be between 100 and 125 pounds per square inch. Trim the ship so it'll fly hands off. Uncage the gyro pilot instruments. Line up the control indices. First the rudder. Then the aileron. And last the elevator. Set the speed valve at 2 or 3. Now turn on the autopilot. And finally, if necessary, readjust the indices for level flight. Well, I guess we've been up long enough. Let's head for the barn. Turn the autopilot and cockpit heaters off. Check to see that de-icer and anti-icer are off. Turret stowed. Fuel tube fullest tank. Cross feed valve off. Mixture auto rich. Fuel booster pumps high. Supercharger neutral. When airspeed drops below 175, lower gear and check it. Hydraulic and accumulator pressure, 800 to 1,100 pounds per square inch. Props, automatic and set for 2,400 RPM. And lower your flaps. Retrim the elevators. Check brake pressure with your toe. Approach at not less than 110 miles an hour. Touchdown at about 90 miles an hour. Tail down. That was a landing with 3/4 flaps. Let's go back and look at some other types. If you want to use less runway, for example, just lower the flaps all the way. Remember, you have a lot more drag with full flaps, so come in with a little more power. The P-61 was designed with a large area of flaps for slow landings at night. If you're forced to land on a short runway, make a power approach. Use full flaps and fly the airplane quite slowly. You'll have to keep considerable power to prevent stalling, but the ship will get down in less than 1,000 feet this way. For a single-engine landing, bank into the good engine if practicable when you enter the traffic pattern. Lower the wheels just after you turn into the approach, but don't lower the flaps until you're sure of making the field. Use some power on the good engine. Try to make your approach as normal as possible. If you're going faster than normal, fly the plane onto the ground and use the brakes rather than holding it off to lose the excess speed. Some pilots prefer to make a landing with no power. It may be done with full flaps. The glide must be quite steep in order to maintain airspeed, and the flare should be started rather high so the plane won't mush into the ground. But now let's see what happens after the wheels are on the ground. Hold the nose off the ground as long as possible in order to spare the brakes. After you complete the landing run and come to a stop, be sure the cowl flaps are open and raise the wing flaps. Idle the engines at 1,000 to 1,200 RPM until cylinder head temperatures drop below 205 degrees centigrade. Mixture should be auto-rich, and all cowl flaps open. Advance throttle to 25 inches and pull her back, cleaning out the engine. Now move the mixture to idle cutoff and advance throttles to full open as the engines die. Turn off all switches. Hold brakes until chocks are under each wheel, then release. Finally, lock the controls. Well, that ends your first lesson in learning how to fly the Black Widow. You have a long way yet to go, but it's usually a case of love at first flight. She's that kind of an airplane. The Black Widow is designed to kill. The fury of her guns and the flaming wrecks of her victims are lighting up dark skies over enemy strongholds. To you who will fly her at night in hard-hitting air battles, we say good luck and good hunting.